Welcome back, everyone, to our bedtime story, The Horse and His Boy by C.S. Lewis. Chapter 5. Prince Corin. My dear sister, and very good lady, said the King Edmund, you must now show more courage, for I tell you plainly we are in no small danger. What is it, Edmund? Asked the Queen. It is this, said Edmund. I do not think we shall find it easy to leave Tajban. While the Prince had hope that you would take him, we were honored guests. But by the lion's mane, I think that as soon as he has your flat denial, we shall be no better than prisoners. One of the dwarfs gave a low whistle. I warned your majesties, I warned you, said Salopad the raven. Easily in, but not easily out, said the lobster in the lobster pot. I have been with the prince this morning, continued Edmund. He is little used, more's the pity, to having his will crossed, and he is very chafed at your long delays and doubtful answers. This morning he pressed me very hard to know your mind. I put it aside, meaning at the same time to diminish his hopes with some light common jests about women's fancies, and hinted that his suit was likely to be cold. He grew angry and dangerous. There was a sort of threatening, though still veiled under a show of courtesy in every word he spoke. Yes, said Tumnus, and when I supped with the Grand Vizier last night, it was the same. He asked me how I liked Tajban, and for I could not tell him I hated every stone of it, and I would not lie, told him that now when high summer was coming on, my heart turned to the cool woods and dewy slopes of Narnia. He gave a smile that meant no good, and said, There is nothing to hinder you from dancing there again, little Coatfoot, always provided you leave us in exchange a bride for our prince. But you mean he would make me his wife by force? Exclaimed Susan. That's my fear, Susan, said Edmund. Wife or slave, which is worse? But how can he? Does the Tisroc think our brother the High King would suffer such an outrage? Sire, said Peregrine to the king, they would not be so mad. Do they think there are no swords and spears in Narnia? Alas, said Edmund, my guess is that the Tisroc has very small fear of Narnia. We are a little land, and little lands on the borders of a great empire were always hateful to the lords of the great empire. He longs to blot them out, gobble them up. When first he suffered the prince to come to Gar Baravel, as your lover, sister, it may be that he was only seeking an occasion against us. Most likely he hopes to make one mouthful of Narnia and Archenland both. Let him try, said the second dwarf. At sea we are as big as he is, and if he assaults us by land he has the desert to cross. True, friend, said Edmund, but is the desert a sure defence? What would Salopad say? I know that desert well, said the raven, for I have flown above it far and wide in my younger days. You may be sure that Shasta picked up his ears at this point. And this is certain, that if the Tisroc goes by the great oasis, he can never lead a great army across it into Archenland. For though they could reach the oasis by the end of their first day's march, yet the springs there would be too little for the thirst of all those soldiers and their beasts. But there is another way. Shasta listened more intently still. He that would find that way, said the raven, must start from the tombs of the ancient kings and ride northwest, so that the double peak of Mount Pyre is always straight ahead of you. And so in a day's riding, or a little more, he shall come to the head of a stony valley, which is so narrow that a man might be within a furlong of it 1,000 times and never know it was there. And looking down this valley, he will see neither grass nor water nor anything else good. But if he rides on down it, he will come to a river and can be by the water, and can ride by the water all the way into Archenland. And do the Collarmans know of this western way? Asked the Queen. Friends, said Edmund, what is the use of all this discourse? We are not asking whether Narnia or Collarman would win if war arose between them. We are asking how to save the honor of the Queen and our lives out of this devilish city. For though my brother Peter, the High King, defeated the Tisroc a dozen times over, yet long before that day our throats would be cut, and the Queen's Grace would be the wife, or more likely the slave, of this prince. We have our weapons, King, said the first dwarf, and this is a reasonably defensible house. As to that, said the king, I do not doubt that every one of us will sell our lives dearly in the gate, and they would not come at the queen, but over our dead bodies. Yet we should be merely rats fighting in a trap, when all's said. Very true, croaked the raven. These last stands in houses make good stories, but nothing ever came of them. After the first few repulses, the enemy always sets them on fire. Oh, I am the cause of all this, said Susan, bursting into tears. Oh, if only I had never left Garbarville. Our last happy day was before those ambassadors came from Gallerman. The moles were planting an orchard for us. Oh, oh, and she buried her head, her face in her hands, and sobbed. Courage, Sue, courage, said Edmund. Remember, but what is the matter with you, Master Tumnus? For the fawn was holding both his horns with his hands as if he were trying to keep his head on by them, and writhing to and fro as if he had pain in his side. Don't speak to me, said Tumnus. I'm thinking so that I can hardly breathe. Wait, do wait. There was a moment's puzzled silence, and then the fawn looked up, drew a breath, mopped his forehead, and said, The only difficulty is how to get down to our ship with some stores, too, without being seen and stopped. Yes, said the dwarf dryly. Just that the beggar's only difficulty about riding is that he has no horse. Wait, said Tumnus impatiently. All we need is some pretext for going down to our ship. Today, and taking stuff on board. Yes, said the King Edmund doubtfully. Well then, said the fawn, how about if your majesties bade the prince to a great banquet to be held on board our galleon, the splendid High Line, tomorrow night, and let the message be worded as graciously as the queen can contrive, without pledging her honor, so as to give the prince a hope that she is weakening. This is very good counsel, sire, croaked the raven. And then, continued Tumnus excitedly, everyone will expect us to be going to the ship all day, making preparations for our guests, and let some of us go to the bazaars and spend every minute we have at the fruiterers and the sweetmeat sellers and the wine merchants, just as if we were really giving a feast. And let us order magicians and jugglers and dancing girls and flute players all to be on board tomorrow night. I see, said Edmund, rubbing his hands. And then we'll all be on board tonight, as soon as it's quite dark. Up sails and out oars, said the king. And to the sea, cried Tumnus, leaping up and beginning to dance. And our nose northward, said the dwarf. Running for home, hurrah, for Narnia and the north, said the others. And the prince, waking next morning and finding his birds flown, said Paradin, clapping his hands. Oh, Master Tumnus, dear Master Tumnus, said the queen, catching his hands and swinging with him as he danced, you have saved us all. The prince will chase us, said another lord whose name Shasta had not heard. That's the least of my fears, said Edmund. I have seen all the shipping on the river, and there's no tall ship of war nor swift galley there. I wish he may chase us, for the splendid High Line could sink anything he has to send after her, if we were overtaken at all. Sire, said the raven, you shall hear no better plot than the fawn's, though he sat in council for 7 days, and now, as we birds say, nests before eggs. Which is much to say, let us all take our food, and then at once be about our business. Everyone arose at this, and the doors were opened, and the lords and the creatures stood aside for the king and queen to go out first. Shasta wondered what he ought to do, but Mr. Tumnus said, Lie there, your highness, and I will bring you up a little feast to yourself in a few moments. There is no need for you to move until we are ready to embark. Shasta laid his head down again on the pillows, and soon he was alone in the room. This is perfectly dreadful, thought Shasta. It never came into his head to tell these Narnians the whole truth and ask for their help. Being brought up by a hard, close-fisted man like Arshish, he had a fixed habit of never telling grown-ups anything if he could help it. For he thought they would always spoil or stop whatever he was trying to do. And he thought that even if the Narnian king might be friendly to the two horses because they were talking beasts of Narnia, he would hate Aravis because she was a Caliban and would either sell her for a slave or send her back to her father. As for himself, I simply daren't tell them I'm not Prince Corin. Now, thought Shasta, I've heard all their plans. If they knew I wasn't one of them, they'd never let me out of the house alive. They'd be afraid I betrayed them to the Tisrock. They'd kill me. And if the real Corin turns up, it'll all come out, and they will. He had, you see, no idea how noble and freeborn people behave. What will I do? What am I to do? He kept saying to himself. What? Hello, here comes that goaty little creature again. The fawn trotted in, half dancing, with a tray in its hands, which was nearly as large as himself. This he set on an inlaid table beside Shasta's sofa, and sat down himself on the carpeted floor with his goatee legs crossed. Now, Princely, he said, make a good dinner. It will be your last in Tashbaan. It was a fine meal, after the Calaman fashion. I don't know whether you would have liked it or not, but Shasta did. There were lobsters and salad and snipe, stuffed with almonds and truffles, and a complicated dish made of chicken livers and rice and raisins and nuts. There were cool melons and gooseberry fools and mulberry fools and every kind of nice thing that can be made with ice. There was also a little flagon of the sort of wine which is called white, though it is really yellow. While Shasta was eating, the good little fawn, who thought he was still dazed with sunstroke, kept talking to him about the fine times he would have when they all got home, after about his good father, King Loon of Arkenland, and the little castle where he lived on the southern slope of the pass. And don't forget, said Thomas, that you are promised your first suit of armor and your first war horse on your next birthday, and then your highness will begin to learn how to tilt and to joust, and in a few years, if all goes well, King Peter has promised your royal father that he himself will make you knight of Carparvel, and in the meantime, there will be plenty of comings and goings between Narnia and Arkenland across the neck of the mountains, and of course, you remember you have promised to come for a whole week to stay with me for the summer festival, and there'll be bonfires all night, dances of fauns and dryads in the heart of the woods, and who knows, we might see Aslan himself. When the meal was over, the fawn told Shasta to stay quietly where he was, and it wouldn't do you any harm to have a little sleep. I'll call you in plenty of time to get on board, and then home, Narnia, and the north. Shasta had so enjoyed his dinner and all the things Tumnus had been telling him that when he was alone and his thoughts took a different turn. He only hoped now that the real Corin would not turn up until it was too late, and that he would be taken away to Narnia by ship. I'm afraid he did not think at all about what would happen to the real Corin when he was left behind in Tashbaan. He was a little worried about Aravis and Bree waiting for him at the tombs, but then he said to himself, well, how can I help it? And anyway, that Aravis thinks she's too good to go with me anyway, so she can jolly well go alone. And all the time he couldn't help feeling that it would be much nicer going to Narnia by sea than trolling across the desert. When he thought all of this, he did what I expect you would have done if you had been up very early, had a long walk, and a great deal of excitement, then a very good meal, and were lying on a sofa in a cool room with no noise in it except when a bee came buzzing in through the window. He fell asleep. What woke him was a loud crash. He jumped up off the sofa staring. He saw at once, from the mere look of the room, the lights and the shadows all looked different, that he must have slept for several hours. He saw also what had made the crash, a costly porcelain vase which had been standing on the windowsill and lay on the floor, broken into about 30 pieces. But he had hardly noticed all of these things. What he did notice was 2 hands gripping the windowsill from outside. They gripped harder and harder, getting white at the knuckles. Then up came a head and a pair of shoulders. A moment later there was a boy of Shasta's own age, sitting astride the sill with one leg hanging down inside the room. Shasta had never seen his own face in a looking-glass. Even if he had, he might not have realized that the other boy was, at ordinary times, almost exactly like him. At the moment, this boy was not particularly like anyone, for he had the finest black eye you have ever seen, and a tooth missing, and his clothes, which must have been splendid when he put them on, were torn and dirty, and there was both blood and mud on his face. "Who are you?" said the boy in a whisper. "Are you Prince Corin?" said Shasta. "Yes, of course," said the other. "But who are you?" "I'm nobody. Nobody in particular, I mean," said Shasta. "King Edmund caught me in the street and mistook me for you. I suppose we must look alike. Can I get out the way you got in?" "Yes, if you're any good at climbing." "But why are you in such a hurry?" "I say, we ought to be able to get some fun out of this being mistaken for one another." "No, no," said Shasta. "We must change places at once. It'll be simply frightful if Mr. Tumnus comes back and finds us both here. I've had to pretend to be you, and you're starting tonight, secretly. And where were you all this time?" "A boy in the streets made a beastly joke about Queen Susan," said Prince Corin, "so I knocked him down. He ran howling into his house, and his big brother came out, so I knocked the big brother down. Then they all followed me until we ran into 3 old men with spears who they called the Watch. So I fought the Watch, and they knocked me down. It was getting dark by now. Then the Watch took me along to lock me up somewhere. So I asked if they'd like a stoup of wine, and they said they didn't mind at all. Then I took them down to a wine shop and got them some, and they all sat down and drank until they fell asleep. I thought it was time for me to go off, so I came out quietly, and then I found the first boy, the one who had started all the trouble, still hanging about, so I knocked him down again. And after that I climbed up a pipe onto the roof of a house and lay quiet till it began to get light this morning. Ever since then I've been finding my way back. I say, is there anything to drink?" "No, I drank it," said Shasta. "And now show me how you got in." "There's not a minute to lose. You'd better lie down on the sofa and pretend. But I forget. It'll do no good. With all those bruises and black eye, you'll just have to tell them the truth once I'm safely away." "What else did you think I'd be telling them?" asked the prince with a rather angry look. "And who are you?" "There's no time," said Shasta in a frantic whisper. "I'm Narnian, I believe. Something northern, anyway. But I've been brought up all my life in Calormen, and I'm escaping across the desert with a talking horse called Bree. And now, quick, how do I get away?" "Look," said Corin. "Drop from this window to a roof of the veranda. But you must do it lightly, on your toes, or someone will hear you. Then along to your left, and you can get up to the top of that wall if you're any good at climbing. Then along the wall to the corner, drop onto the rubbish heap you find outside, and there you are." "Thanks," said Shasta, who was already sitting on the sill. The 2 boys were looking into each other's faces, and suddenly found they were friends. "Goodbye," said Corin, "and good luck. I do hope you get safe away." "Goodbye," said Shasta. "I say, you've been having some adventures." "Nothing to yours," said the prince. "Now drop. Lightly, I said." He added as Shasta dropped, "I hope we meet in Archenland. Go to my father, King Loon, and tell him you're a friend of mine. Look out, I hear someone coming." It's the end of chapter 5. Please comment, like, and subscribe.